Hello everyone. So in this video, we will go over Lab 7C. This is basically the first question of Lab 7C. It says that we're supposed to create a method which should be similar to what's given here, which means it should return an integer array, and the name of the method should be read10, and there is no parameters there are no parameters within these brackets, so you do not need to pass any parameters to the method. Now let's try to create that, and then we'll look into what the method needs to do. So if you're creating it in NetBeans, so always write public, and even in CodeRunner always write public static, and then the return type, which is mentioned here as int array. So int array, and then the name of the method should be read10. So I can write it this way, no parameters, and then the brackets. Now notice it's giving me an error here that says, if we hover over it, it says missing return statement. That's fine because the method is expecting you to return something which is int array in this case, and because you're not returning anything, that's the only reason for the error. So when we code it, it should go away. All right. Now, the first thing that the method needs to do is it should read. So notice read from the user 10 numbers which are input by the user, and it saves them into an array. Okay, so now we know we need to read 10 numbers, and because there are multiple values, as in there are 10 values, you cannot create 10 variables to store them, right? You need to have an array. So you're reading, so we can figure out, okay, we need a scanner for reading, we need an array to store, and we know that the size of the array should be 10 because it's mentioned here, right? So the first thing I'll do basically is create a scanner object. So I'll name it input is equal to new scanner. And because here I'm reading from the user, system.in. That would signify that I'm reading from the user. Now, notice it did not give me any error because I already have the scanner added to my file. So if it wasn't here, then it will give me an error here. And then in this case, I can click on it and add the import. All right, so we're done with that. We know we need the scanner for reading from the user, and then we need to store it in an array. Now we know it's numbers, so we should be using int array. So I'll create a integer array here. I'll name it numbers is equal to new int, and then you need to pass the size. We know we need to read 10 numbers, so the size of the array can be 10 because we're going to store those numbers in this array, right? So we're done with that also. Now, because we're reading multiple numbers and we need to store them in an array, we know we require a loop. Instead of writing 10 prompts for the user, like it's written here, instead of writing those 10 times, you can write it once within a loop, and then you make the loop repeat 10 times. So in this case, I will have a for loop, create an index, start from 0. Index should be less than numbers dot length, and then don't forget the increment. There's your loop. So we're starting from 0 because the arrays always start from 0. So you start from 0, you go until the length of the array, and which will make the last index small. Like for example, if this is 10, the last index should be 9. So in order to satisfy this condition, you can write it this way, and then plus plus index. Now we're done with that. Now we need to start prompting the user, right? We need to tell the user enter number so that you can write it in a system print line. Enter number. Now the number that the user gives you, you can directly write it in or you can directly store it in the numbers array. So I would write it this way. Numbers of index should be equal to um, the number that you get from the user, which is input, the scanner object, dot, because we're reading a number, next int. Okay, so this will give you the number that the user enters, and then this is basically where you're storing. So at a specific position in the array, you're storing that number that the user gave you. So I think we're done with the first point, which says you're supposed to read 10 numbers which are input by the user and save them into an array. So we're done with that. Now, the second thing that this code needs to do is it should write the write the array of numbers into a new file called numbers.txt. So your program now should create a file numbers.txt, and it should write whatever you've read from the user. So all these inputs. So if we look here, this is basically the test. When you call the method, it should ask the user for 10 numbers. So these are the 10 numbers, and whatever numbers the user is going to give you, you're supposed to write them to a file called numbers.txt. Now, remember, it's telling you to create a new file, numbers.txt. So if it was already existing, it should overwrite it. All right. And then finally, you should return the numbers of the array of numbers. Um, so we can do the last thing quickly because it's easier. We already have the numbers array here, so I can just write return numbers, right? So we're done with the first point. We're done with the third point. Now the second point, we're supposed to write whatever we've read from the user into a file. And the name of the file is numbers.txt, which I'll just copy from here. And then we know that in order to write to a file, you need a print stream, right? For reading from a file, we use scanner. There are many other things. You can if you go and Google how to read and write from and to files in Java, it will give you plenty of ways. But in this course, we're only learning about scanner for reading and print stream or file output stream for writing. You can choose whatever way. If it works, it's fine. As long as it's working, it's fine. But to keep things easier, these are the two things we're focusing on. Now, again, when you're supposed to write to a file, you should yes, you should have a print stream, right? So I'll quickly create that. Print stream. I'll name it writer is equal to new print stream. Now, from what I remember, for the print stream, you need a file. You need to pass a file object. So before that, I'll just import it because that's the error. I've not imported it. So if I click here, it adds the print stream for me, which I'll just remove and have a star. So if I require anything else, it will already be there in the program. Okay, and then print stream. Okay, so the print stream basically expects a file object. For that, you're supposed to create file is equal to new file, give it the name numbers.txt. And this file, you need to pass it to print stream. Now again, it gives me an error. It says unreported exception, file not found exception must be caught or declared to be thrown. All right. Again, because we're missing because we're trying to access a file numbers.txt and we're trying to open it. Maybe if it doesn't in this case, if it doesn't exist, it will create the file, but still there could be an exception that can happen. So what we will do is we'll add that exception here. I think this shouldn't be there, but fine, that's fine. Again, so we have the writer now. What I'll do now is while we're reading from the user and storing within the array, I'll just, within that loop, I'll just write it out to the file also. Writer dot, write it out to the file. How do we write it out? Print or print line. So print, I'll use print line. That's better. Print line, and then pass numbers of index. All right. So as soon as you're reading it from the user and storing it in the array, you can there itself you can just write it to the file. All right. And then once you're done looping and writing, you can just write writer dot close. So you can close the writer to indicate that no more writing needs to happen and the file can be saved. All right. Now I think that's it. Um, if we look here, reads 10 numbers, we're done with that. Writes the array to file, we're done with that. Returns the array of numbers, we're also done with that. So let's copy this method, which is, if I highlight it, it's from line 35 until line 52. So if I just copy this method and paste it in Code Runner, so here I've pasted it in Code Runner, and let's see if it's working. Let's click on pre-check. Okay, so it's fine in the pre-check. Let's click on check. Okay, so it's correct. So all we had to do is we had to create a scanner for reading from the user. We had to create a file object so we can, get the properties of that file, open it for writing using print stream. You can use anything if you found something else to be working and you prefer that way. I have no objection as long as you get the correct result. And then you need an array for storing the 10 numbers that you're going to read from the user. You need a loop so you can repeat, you can iterate, asking the user for the input. Again, you need to read 10 numbers. So you would use numbers.length. You print out the prompt. Again, this is the prompt. Don't forget comments. Um, they're important. This is the prompt. This is reading and storing user input. And this is basically writing to file. All right. And then you before just before returning from the method, you can just close the print string so that it can be saved and it's indicated that you no longer want to write to it. And then you just return the numbers as mentioned in the question. So that's your first question. Now we'll move on to the second question. So this is the second question of Lab 7C. It says that you're supposed to create a method. It should be named copy file, and it should return a string type or a string value. And then it takes a parameter of type string called file name. All right, so let's try to create that first. So I would write public static because it's now supposed to return string. So string copy file, and then a string parameter called file name. Okay, that should have been camel case, but it's not. So anyways, okay, so that's your method. Again, it's going to give you like an error that it's missing a return statement, but don't worry about that. You will have it by the end of your code. Okay, so the first thing that this method needs to do is it should read the data from the file one line at a time, and it should save it into an array. Too many things happening here. So the first thing we need to look at is that we have a file name as a parameter, all right? And if we want to read from a file, or if we want to even write to a file, we need to have a file object. So that's the first thing you would do, all right? So file, you would create a file object, file, I would name it read file is equal to new file, and then I will pass file name to it. Okay, so that's my file object. Now, if I want to read from a file, I should create a scanner object, right? So again, it didn't give me that error because I already have the imports here from the previous question. So if you don't have those imports, just add them, all right? So the next thing is because we're supposed to read from the file, I should add scanner. Sorry, I should create a scanner object. I will name it reader is equal to new scanner. And because this time we want to read from the file, we need to pass the file object. So read file, that's it. Okay, and now if you notice, it's giving me an error here. It's saying that unreported exception, which is file not found exception, must be caught or declared to be thrown, meaning that you need your code should be able to throw this exception. That's all it means. You can click on the icon again here and then add throws clause for java.io.file not found exception. And there you go. It will add it to your method. Okay. Or you can even add it manually. It's up to you. Now we have the reader. Now we need to figure out what type of data we're reading from the file and what kind of array we need to create and what should be the size. Because here it says you're reading from the file one line at a time, and then you need to save it to a file. Sorry, you need to save whatever you read from the file into an array. So the first thing I would look at is what kind of array I need to create. If you remember, the the scanner object has a method called next line that will allow you to read a complete line um, from whatever you're reading, whether it's a file or user input. If you notice this method, it returns a string, like whatever is written on the right hand side of the method name is basically the type it's returning. It returns a string. So I know when I'll be using next line to read the whole line from the file, I'm actually reading string, right? So in that case, I would know, and because I want to save whatever I'm reading from the file to the array, I know that the array should be string array, right? So I would create a string array, and I will name it, let's say, contents is equal to new string array. Now the question is, what should be the size of the array? How to figure that out? We don't know how many lines are there in the file that we're reading because maybe the file changes every time you call this method. So what you're going to assume, if you look here, it says you can assume that there are less than 100 items in the file. So I'm going to assume that um, the size, the file is not going to have more than 100 lines, and so I'm only reading like the maximum that I would ever read is 100, and so I'll give the array a size of 100. Okay, now we're done with that. Now we need to actually read. So for reading, we know there are multiple lines in a file. We know that we need to read one by one until we reach the end of the file. And we need to store whatever we're reading at different indexes of the array. So to do that, the first thing I would do is I would create an index to keep track of all the indexes one by one, so I can write to those indexes, or I can save values at those indexes. Now I'll have a while loop which will read, which will use the reader object, the scanner object, to check if there are any more lines in the file to be read. If there is, then if there is a line after that can be read, then the loop will repeat. Otherwise, it will just exit the loop, and no more reading will happen. Okay, so now we have the loop, and then we need to, in order to read from the file, you would use the scanner object reader dot next line. Okay, and then the same, what this will return for you whatever was read from the file. If I write contents of index before it, that would mean that whatever I have read from the file, I would directly store it to the current index in the array, and then index plus plus to move to the next index. So that's basically reading from the file, checking if there is any more data that can be read from the file. You read whatever is there on the file on that line, you store it into the array, you change the index, and that it keeps repeating until there is no more data to be read from the file. So I think we're done with the first one. It reads the data from the file. We're doing that one line at a time. We're doing that, and it saves into an array. We've done that also. The next thing it should do is it should ask the user to enter the name of a file, and the prompt should be enter a new name for the file. Okay. Now we already have a scanner object which at the moment is reading from a file. What you can do is either you can create a new scanner object that reads from the system, like system.in, or you can just change this scanner object to new scanner system.in. You can do it this way, or you can create a new scanner object. That's up to you, whatever way you want to go for. Okay, now I have the scanner for reading from the user. I have to prompt the user, and then I need to store the new file name from what I have read. So reader dot next. That will give me the file name. Now I've read the file name also from the user. Now we're supposed to write the array of the data. Write the array of data into the new file without writing any null values. So whatever name the user gave you as the new name for the file, you need to write all the the data in the array. So you need to take all the data in the array and you need to write it to the new file, the name of which the user has just given you. All right. So, but you need to make sure that you're not writing any null values. So what we can do now, if you remember, we need to again create a file object, and for reading we use scanner. For reading from a file we use scanner. For writing to a file we use print stream. So we need print stream also here. So the first thing I'll do is create file, write file is equal to okay, new file, and then I will pass the new file name. Okay, and the next thing would be print stream. I would name it writer is equal to new print stream, and then I would pass the write file object to this print stream. All right. Now again, because it's a loop, sorry, because it's an array, we need to loop through it. We need to one by one, whatever value is there in the array, we need to write it to the file. All right. So for that, Again, I would create a for loop. I would change index to 0. Now, notice I did not write int here because index is already at, so it's already declared here, so I don't need to write int. Index should be less than contents.length, and then plus index, and then if contents of index is not equal to null, because we need to make sure that we're not writing any null values, right? Because it mentions here that without writing any null values, you're supposed to write to the file. So here I would use writer dot print ln, and then just pass contents dot, not dot, sorry, contents of index. Too many mistakes in this question, but that's okay. That's part of programming. Okay, for loop, and then if the value in the array is not null, then you write it to the file, and once you're done looping through the whole array, you just close your print string. Okay, so we're done with that. Now here it says the last thing we need to do is returns the new file name. So I can just return new file and the error is gone. Okay, so that's your method. I will just copy it from here. So if you want to copy the method, you just click on the curly bracket, check where it ends, and just copy that whole thing. Okay. So here again, I will paste the whole thing, and let's try to pre-check if it works. Okay, perfect. So pre-check is working. Let's check for check. Okay, so I passed 2 tests out of 3, and it says that, okay, so in one of the situations, if the file does not exist, then meaning that this file that you're getting from the method, from the parameters, if this file doesn't exist, then you are supposed to print out to the user that file was not found. Okay, so in this case, I will just copy that, and before anything, I will just check if read file dot exists is equal to false, then you just print out to the user file not found, and otherwise you can continue with the other code. Okay, now the one issue is I can just keep string file name outside here, and give it empty string, because I'm returning it here, right? So for that purpose, I will keep it outside because if the file was not found, and in that case, the else part will never get executed. If you create your new file inside it, then the code outside will not know what new file is. So just for that purpose, keep your string new file name outside, and I think this should be fine. So we're checking if the if this file exists, this method will return true. But if it returns false, that would mean that the file does not exist. So in that case, you can just print out file not found. So hopefully it works. Let's click on check. Perfect. So that's the only change you have to make. Um, and that's your answer for the second question of the lab. And I think there are only two questions. And yeah, that's it. So thank you for watching, and hopefully this was helpful.